Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and as always told, out of voice for radio. So today, we need to take a look at the continued history of the Pokemon trading card game. We have made it to next Destinies, and you see, this was a phenomenal set. And I know that just last week I told you about Noble Victories. And I told you how Noble Victories was a phenomenal set. Well, you know what, ladies and gentlemen? 2 sets in a row, as I like to phrase it, nuts good. Now, this was released in Japanese on September the 16th, 2011. We got it in English on February the 8th, 2012. And this was a pretty big deal, because it introduced Pokémon EX. And of course, we can't talk Pokémon EX without Mewtwo, who basically remained the best Pokémon EX for, it was just ridiculous, alright? It was ridiculous. Worth noting that this set was also partly comprised of the Reshirami and Zekrom Battle Strength decks in Japan, which is how we ended up with extra Reshirami and Zekrom. Now, what was really weird here, and it's something that Pokemon hadn't done before, all of the EXs had alternate art versions, so you could get regular Mewtwo or alternate art. Now, if you're playing nowadays as I record in 2021, though hopefully this video lasts years because, takes a long time to make these, you'll be very used to these chase Pokemon having full art versions and rainbow rares and all of that. That is not what we expected back in 2012. They were identical other than the artwork, but whereas the previous black and white sets had brought us just regular cards as full arts, this had really gone over the top and brought really cool textured full arts, and the texture was new and weird, but we loved it, into the game, and did stop the regular full arts. So the ones we'd seen previously, like the Reshirami and Zekrom, they were done. You got each EX possibly as a full art, but no regular ones. And if you would look at them side by side, the texture and all that you saw on the new EXs really did push them apart from the old versions, like the Reshirami and Zekrom, although they were very cool as well. The other thing that was introduced in Next Destinies was shiny secret rare cards. Now, these would be used for a few sets after this, but this was the set in which they made their debut. Now, we had 4 of them in the set, and these were alternate arts. They were existing cards that were just reprinted, but they were shiny Pokemon, they were textured, they were secret rare, they were amazing. We had a reprint of the M-Ball with Inferno Fandango, the one that I told you was so good it won Worlds. The Chandelure with Cursed Shadow let you drop 3 damage counters if you were active. Great cards or a huge amount to play. The Zoroark with Foul Play, that for a double colorless energy let you just copy one of the defending Pokemon's attacks. That's a card that I used a lot while it was legal. And the Hydreigon that could... the Hydreigon was a bit rubbish, to be honest with you. There was a really good Hydreigon. This wasn't it. And annoyingly, I was looking through my cards before recording this video, and Emboar and Chandelure are 2 Pokemon that I love. Zoroark's a great card that I played a load of. Which of these 4 do I have in my binder? You already know that it's Hydreigon, and you already know that I'm a little bit sad. Now, the secret rares we'd had in the previous sets, the Pikachu and the Meowth in black and white and in Noble Victories, they were gone. They were just random one-off secret rares in 2 sets, and then they disappeared forever. They're a little bit weird, but they're kind of cool. And apparently I do have both of these. The Meowth, you can see really clearly the coin in the text box. You can't really see it on the Pikachu, but there was a Thunderbolt there that's got a little bit of texture on, and it is very, very cool. Now, weirdly enough, in this set, not for the last time, we actually did just see reprints of Reshirami and Zekrom. The Reshirami and Zekrom with Outrage and those good attacks to do 120 damage, the ones that came around in black and white, they were just straight reprinted with different artwork here. Shall we say they kept going, we would see these cards again. But I find it notable that they just reprinted these exact same cards in the set with slightly different artwork. We're only talking 3 sets later. Now, the lovely folks at Bulbapedia did point out, great website for research, this is actually a set which is all based around Castelia City. So if you take a look at the print of Pokemon Center, you can clearly see what city that Pokemon Center's in. We've obviously got Sky Arrow Bridge here, which is very, very cool. That's the bridge into the city. And then there's cool little Easter eggs like the Vanillite sitting in front of the Castelia Cone ice cream stand, which is very cool. One thing the folks at Bulbapedia did point out that I actually completely missed at the time, if you look at like the Grimer's clearly in the sewers. Well, the sewers weren't accessible in Black and White. They didn't actually become accessible until Black 2 and White 2, which weren't out at the time. So this is a kind of cool little nod to the future. Now, a card we're not going to be talking about when we talk about the best cards is Shiftery, but Shiftery's a weird story with this particular set. You see, Shiftery was kind of a bad card. It's a stage 2, and it's got the ability Giant Fan. When you evolve into it, you may flip a coin. If heads, you choose one of your opponent's Pokemon, and they shuffle that Pokemon and all cards attached to it into their deck. And at the time, we all kind of went, well, fun little ability, never really going to see any play, and it didn't. But then, we saw Forest of Giant Plants. And in Expanded, Pokemon were so worried about the fact that this could actually be a huge problem that what they went and did was ban Shiftery in the Expanded format. Because we had Forest of Giant Plants. Now, Forest of Giant Plants let you evolve your grass Pokemon whenever you liked, but what was really, really important about Forest of Giant Plants, it was a Pokemon you were evolving from, not the Pokemon you were evolving into. And okay, this Shiftery is a Darkness-type Pokemon, but we had Grass-type Nuzleaf. And now, all of a sudden, especially using cards like Super Scoop Up, you can essentially play this Shiftery several times in the course of one turn, and you can basically go first and just clear your opponent's board of Pokemon, and then they would lose. And that seemed like not a fun way to play, so Shiftery ended up getting banned and Expanded despite the fact that it was out for ages and was just never any good. Like, at all. The pre-release promo here was Arcanine. Wasn't particularly good or noteworthy, if I'm honest with you, but it was there. There were actually 2 Arcanine in the set for what it's worth. Neither of them were particularly good. And at this stage, I need to give a gigantic shout out to the lovely Matthew Tidman, SBeyond200, over on Twitter. And I owed them a shout out last week, but it was too late. The video was already recorded. I apologize. Because I mentioned in a previous video how it was really difficult to actually get good pictures of the pre-release deck boxes from this era. So what Matthew did was just photograph them and send them over to me, which is ridiculous. Literally all of them from Next Destinies onwards. No, actually, I'm lying to you, from Noble Victories onwards. So, all the way up to Legendary Treasures, I'm going to be showing you really cool pictures of these deck boxes, because Matthew just went out of his way to send me these pictures. And I say it quite a lot on this channel. I get a lot of help from a lot of cool people here, but stuff like this, it's such a cool little gesture that makes my life and makes these videos so much easier. Matthew, you are awesome. So now you've all had a good look at the pre-release deck box, because it's been up on the screen in all of its glory. Yay! Now, we do need to take a look at all of the EXs here. Like I said, they did all have a full art version as well. So let's take a quick gander at them with both the regular and the full art version. Although most of them are really good, so we are going to talk about them as we go along. There was a Shaymin EX. No, not that one. This was the first Shaymin EX, the grass one. But had a nice attack to punish your opponent for taking prizes. We had Reshirami EX that, like most fire Pokemon, was a little bit expensive but did big damage. Kyuremi X, who I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, or even last week with the other Kyurem, that I was a big fan of. Zekrom EX, that was very similar to Reshirami, as you might imagine. Mewtwo EX, that, let's face it, poster child of the set, one of the best Pokemon we've ever had in the history of the game. Yes, I mean that. And Reggie Giga Cx, my favourite, and my boy, one of the best decks I have ever made that was very much my own. But we'll get there in a little bit. Now, the most expensive card from the set was probably Zoroark. As I'm looking around, that's coming in somewhere in the region of about $120. So let's call that the most expensive card in the set. You really are looking at these secret rares. There were 4 of them, and shall we say, buying a box did not guarantee you got one. They were quite expensive cards. Now, the theme decks here were actually themed around Reshiram and Zekrom, which is pretty cool and helps to explain why we got the reprints, or we got the reprints and they made the most of it. Either way, we're fine. Explosive Edge was the Reshiram theme deck, and both of these actually had the same Reshiram and Zekrom coin, which is very cool. This got you both a holo and a non-holo version of Reshiram, the holo version being exclusive to the deck. It was a non-holo in the set proper. And then we got non-holo rares of Beartic, Persian, and Chandelure. Chandelure being exclusive, it was a holo in the set proper, and a really good card. Wait, no, I'm thinking of the other Chandelure. It was still a fun card, but it wasn't the nuts one that we talked about a minute ago. Sorry, the one that had the secret rare in this set. Zekrom had Voltage Vortex, which I very much appreciate. And again, we had a holo and a non-holo Zekrom, the holo being exclusive. And then we got non-holo rares of Weavile. And then both Scrafty and Luxray. And Scrafty and Luxray were holos in the set, so the non-holo versions were exclusive to this theme deck. Now, if we start and move on and have a look at the best cards here, we've got to start with Mewtwo. Mewtwo was out and out ridiculous. Mewtwo was borderline broken. And Side Drive was fine. Free energy, 120 discarded energy. Honestly, it KO'd a Mewtwo, which was nice, but not every deck was playing it. But we had X-Pull. For 2 energy, you did 20 damage for each energy attached to this Pokemon and the defending Pokemon. And the Pokemon trading card game very quickly ended up being based all around this Mewtwo card. Any way you could accelerate energy, people would pair it with Mewtwo, but of course you could use it for a double colorless energy. And the thing was, Mewtwo, with the card pool that we had at the time, was a very difficult Pokemon to counter. There weren't any really good single prize Pokemon that ended up as a great counter, and a lot of the other EXs needed enough energy that Mewtwo could run through them. Honestly, the very best counter to Mewtwo EX was Mewtwo EX. And if Mewtwo had a double colorless energy on, you could KO that Mewtwo with your own Mewtwo with either 3 energy or 2 energy and a plus power. The math worked out essentially that if there were 2 Mewtwo, each of which had a double colorless energy, they would do 160 to each other, so you needed a 3rd energy or you needed a plus power in order to KO right back. It's why energy acceleration was so good to try and get that 3rd energy. And it's hard for me to overstate quite how much this changed the game overnight. Overnight, the game turned into, if you do not have a counter to Mewtwo, you will lose the game. One of the weirdest things in my entire playing career was when I went to the European Challenge Cup in 2012. This was a tournament that used to hold in Arnhem in the Netherlands, not in Holland. And this was the European Internationals before we had European Internationals. Generally 300 to 400 people from all over Europe would descend. Huge tournament. They held it in 2012 on the 18th of February. Now, if we go back, I told you that the release date in English was the 8th of February. So you are talking 10 days later, and it's really, really important to remember that you had to travel to Arnhem in the Netherlands, so it's not like you could get the cards and then immediately play them. You had to get the cards. If you were buying them online, they would have to be delivered to your house in time for you to leave and go to Arnhem. And I know a bunch of you at this stage are thinking, well, hang on a second, Wassy, that's not a problem. There's no way that Next Destinies was legal 10 days after it was released. Yeah, the rules were different back then. It absolutely was. And the point of this story is that tournament largely came down to how many Mewtwo you had. Now, I was lucky. Between myself and my good friend Becca, I was actually able to get 3 Mewtwo EX together. And, you know, there was one game I was playing against a fellow playing a Zekrom deck. So you had the combination there of Pachirisu and Shaman. Pachirisu, you play it to the bench with an extra 2 energy attached to it, and then you use Shaman to move the energy over to obviously Mewtwo. So my opponent did this. And they got their Mewtwo, and they got a KO on my Mewtwo, and they looked very pleased with themselves. And then I benched the second Mewtwo, and their face dropped. because they only had one Mewtwo. The set hadn't been out very long. They didn't have a second Mewtwo. I swept that game with my second Mewtwo. They could not KO it. That's how good Mewtwo was. It saw play with Electric, which would accelerate Lightning Energy. It saw play in those Zekrom decks with Pachirisu and Shaman, like I just mentioned. It saw play just with double colorless energy and a bunch of other Pokemon. It really was an all-encompassing Pokemon. If you want to look at a list of the most impactful Pokemon cards ever in terms of changing the decks we play and how we play the game, Mewtwo would be very, very near the top of that list. If you were playing at the time, you know what I'm talking about. If you weren't playing at the time, I assure you, if anything, I have undersold the impact of Mewtwo on the format. Annoyingly, I went 6-2 at the ECC that year, or 6-3, one of them. I came 33rd and bubbled top cut, and I was very annoyed, but hey-ho, we'll talk about that in a moment. Now, there were a bunch of other really good cards in Next Destinies. It wasn't just Mewtwo. For instance, we had Zeb Striker. Zeb Striker for 2 energy did 40 damage and stopped your opponent playing item cards from their hand during their next turn. We didn't have Garbodor at the time, which was a little bit sad, but when we did get Garbodor to lock abilities, we had a Pokemon that could both item lock and then you could be ability locked. Shall we say that was a deck that a lot of people very much enjoyed. It's a deck we'll get to in a few weeks' time. Kyuremi X, I mentioned earlier, was a very, very good card because what it essentially did was it was a Revenger. For 2 energy, you did 30 damage base plus 30 more for each prize card your opponent's taken. Now, I've shown you all the EXs and the HP that they had. It was generally 180 maximum. So if your opponent's taken 5 prizes, you do 180 damage. So for 2 energy, you get a KO on basically any Pokemon. That was a tech in basically every grass deck at the time. You had to be careful, the HP was terribly low. Fun fact, the last Nationals I played in 2014, I played a grass deck Virizion Genesect just to prove that anyone could pick up the deck and do well with it. And I did do pretty well, but the problem was I forgot to put a single prize attacker in my deck, because I made the deck super rushed on the morning of the event. So my opponent could never take 5 prizes against me, but I did still play this Shaman, because let's say on that particular day I wasn't very clever. Now, Reggie Giga Cx was a card I was extremely fond of. This is probably one of my top 10 favourite cards ever. For 3 energy, 60 damage, and you could do 20 more damage. If you did, you had to do 20 to yourself. But 80 damage was enough to KO all of these support Pokemon like Shaman, Smeargle, etc. So yeah, that was a reason to play this an awful lot. But then for 4 energy, you did 50 damage plus 10 more for each damage counter on you. And it was really hard at the time to get a one-hit KO on a big Pokemon like this. So you sit there using Giga Power, and if your opponent hits but doesn't KO you, Raging Hammer will come back and get them. I loved this card. Kyuremi X was also a very nice card we saw there. 3 energy, 60 damage, and discard a special energy. And special energy with stuff like double colorless did see a lot of play at the time. This was a little bit of a Mewtwo counter, but you had to hope your opponent didn't have another double colorless energy, which most of the time they did. Hail Blizzard 4 energy 120 was not amazing. It really was a 3 energy Frozen Rings. It worked with double colorless. It was a fun little card, especially when people were using special energy. Now, Gardevoir was kind of a weird one. Gardevoir had a nice ability whereby every psychic energy attached to your psychic Pokemon counted as double psychic energy. It didn't stack no matter how many Gardevoir you had out. Each of your psychic just turned into 2. And you don't need me to tell you that people played this with Mewtwo. Now, this was not the best version of Mewtwo. A bunch of people tried it. It was never that amazing. But a fun little rogue deck you would see around at the time was Gardevoir Mewtwo, because the theory was when you got Gardevoir out, every one of your single psychic energy just turned into double colorless, which was a huge advantage. Having a stage 2 meant it never really became as good as it could have. Now, Musharna was a fun card that saw a bunch of play, and it was all for the ability Forewarn. Once during your turn, look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put one in your hand, and the other one on top of your deck. It was a draw engine. It wasn't phenomenal, but it worked quite nicely. And if you played a card that shuffled your deck, you wouldn't even be stuck with that card left there, the one you put back. But then again, you could leave it there if you wanted to. It was a fun little draw engine that made its way into a whole bunch of decks. Now, Amoonguss was a super annoying card that a lot of people tried to get working because of the ability Spore Prize. Yeah. But when you played it from your hand to evolve into it, you got to leave your opponent's active confused and poisoned. Obviously, a bunch of people tried this out with Zeb Striker. The theory being your opponent couldn't use item cards to get out the active, they'd have to retreat. And if they couldn't retreat, they were confused and poisoned and item locked, and that would be kind of funny. Reshirami X was kind of a fun card. It wasn't a phenomenal card, saw a bit of play here and there. 3 energy, 50 damage, 80 on a heads. 4 energy, 150. But if you flip tails, you had to do 50 to yourself. It was a big fire type attacker that did big damage and had lots of HP. And some decks were looking for that, and this fit the bill. And in a very similar sense, we had Zekrom. 3 energy, 50 damage if heads 80. 4 energy, 150, discard 2 energy attached to it. It was kind of interesting because obviously we've seen Reshiram and Zekrom were very similar cards. They had the same first attack, similar second attacks. Here with Reshiram and Zekrom EX, they've got the same first attack, but now Zekrom discards energy, whereas regular Reshiram discarded energy, and Reshiram self-damaged, whereas regular Zekrom self-damaged. So there was a little bit of mirroring going on there, which I personally really appreciated. Zekrom, 150 discard 2 energy with a second attack. Again, it's just a big attacker. High HP, big damage, fit very naturally into electric decks. Now, Vanillux was a very cool card. Vanillux is one of those that almost always gets cool cards. It had an ability whereby you could switch your active, and if you did, your opponent had to switch theirs, although they got a choice of what became active. It wasn't a hugely impactful card, but if you were already playing the Vanillux from Noble Victories, the one with double freeze at almost all, it had like a 15 and 16 chance of paralysis, this was a nice one-off that some people did play. The theory being that you could force your opponent some turns to put up a Pokemon they really didn't want to, while you were item locking them with Vileplume and paralyzing them. It was a fun little tech that saw a bit of play here and there. Wasn't an absolute must-play. And then a card that was never good but was hilarious was Darmanitan, because it had the attack Darmaxitan. For 2 energy minimum, you flipped a coin for each energy attached to it, and did 50 damage for each heads. Remembering, of course, that we had the Victini that we looked at last week that would let you reflip any, well, not any, it let you reflip all of them. So it was all or nothing, but if you didn't flip enough heads, Victini would let you flip again. And Darmaxitan was a card that I saw really frustrate some high-level players, because Darmanitan was a favourite of rogue deck players who were really playing for fun rather than competitiveness, and I saw multiple times a really top player take a loss that knocked them out of Top Cut because they played against some person who just kept flipping heads on Darmaxitan. I'm looking at you, Derek. And it was so much fun. It was never really competitively amazing, but it was so much fun it had to get a mention. Now, we did actually get some really good trainer cards in the set as well. None, no, see, the thing is, I want to say none as good as Sky Arrow Bridge, but actually they probably were. But Sky Arrow Bridge said the retreat cost of each basic Pokemon in play was lowered by 1. And this did multiple things, but mostly it was good for those support Pokemon. All of a sudden, your 1 retreat cost Shaman isn't stuck in the active. Your 1 retreat cost Pachirisu isn't stuck in the active. But far better than that, hey, remember Smeargle? Smeargle's got a retreat cost of 1 and an ability that lets you copy a supporter card in your opponent's hand. So you can essentially portrait with Smeargle and retreat into your attacker, and there was no downside. Or you could portrait with Smeargle, retreat into a different Smeargle, portrait again and switch into your attacker, for argument's sake. But it also did a really weird thing with Celebi Prime. You see, Celebi Prime was the forgotten Prime from Triumphant. When I showed you Triumphant a few weeks ago, check that video, there's a link in the description. I told you that all of the primes from that set were good, and they were, eventually. Celebi wasn't. Celebi was the one that everybody hated. Before Next Destinies came out, you could pick up Celebi for $3, which was about the price of a booster pack. And then Sky Arrow Bridge and Mewtwo came out, and Celebi became amazing. Because remember, Mewtwo doesn't care what kind of energy it's got. And Celebi lets you attach a grass energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon, and Sky Arrow Bridge gives it free retreat, and all of a sudden Celebi Mewtwo became one of the very, very best decks in the game, and almost overnight Celebi shot from $3 to, let's say, many times $3. It became a great card, which is a lesson you really should learn, right? Even cards that everybody says are terrible, we're often just 1 or 2 cards away from being phenomenal. Celebi was a trash junk prime that nobody wanted, and then Next Destinies came out, and it became one of the best cards in the game. Now, we also did have a pair of item cards here, Level Ball and Heavy Ball, and they were both great, because they let you search Pokemon. Level Ball let you grab any Pokemon with 90 HP or less. Heavy Ball let you grab any Pokemon with a retreat cost of 3 or more. Obviously, Level Ball saw more play, partly because there were more Pokemon with 90 HP or less, but also Level Ball would grab Smeargle, Shaman, Pokemon like that. But make no mistake about it, these two cards together made decks way more consistent because you had more options for searching out your Pokemon. And then we had Prism Energy, and Prism Energy was arguably a mistake. Because Prism Energy was basically Rainbow Energy, but only for basic Pokemon, and you didn't have to take a damage counter when you attached it, which is clearly far too good. And remember, we had things like Klinklang at the time, and actually Meganium Prime would do it as well, which would move energy of a particular type around. But of course, when it was attached, it counted. So Meganium could move around this energy. And Klinklang could move around this energy, and it became kind of ridiculous. Klinklang was better, incidentally, but Meganium was still cool. Prism Energy saw a ridiculous amount of play, both in decks like Klinklang and just as a bit of a tech here and there. Now, looking over at the best decks, it's a little bit weird, because a lot of the best decks that came around from this set needed other cards to function. But probably the best one around was CMT, Celebi, Mewtwo, Tornadus. Basic theory here was very simple. You use Celebi to attach extra grass energy, you had double colorless energy, and then you would smash. The Tornadus was a really good option because you would attach a grass energy with Celebi, double colorless for your turn, and then you would just start hitting 80 damage, which remember was the key number to KO all of these little support Pokemon. You had Mewtwo, which obviously you could pile energy on more easily with Celebi. And then of course you've got Sky Arrow Bridge, which gives free retreat to Celebi, and Tornadus, and Smeargle, all of whom were obviously very, very important. Sky Arrow Bridge was one of the really crucial cards to make this deck work. We did also see Terrakion come around in this deck a lot. We haven't got to Dark Explorers yet, although to be fair, that is next week. We're going to get there really soon. When we get there, we'll talk more about Darkrai. Suffice to say at this stage that Darkrai was an absolute powerhouse card that saw a huge amount of play. A huge amount of play. You needed an answer to it, and Terrakion was the best answer to it. And of course, Terrakion was one fighting, one colorless energy. So you would use Celebi to attach the grass as the colorless, and then you attach either fighting or Prism Energy, and that would just absolutely get you straight up to hitting with Retaliate. And then you'd get Darkrai. We would really need Tornadus EX as far as I'm concerned to make this deck amazing. It existed, incidentally, for 3 months before Dark Explorers brought us Tornadus EX. But Tornadus EX really did make the deck tick. And I'm afraid at this stage I do need to point out, though I will be quick, this is the deck with which I got through the Last Chance Qualifier, grinded into Worlds in 2012. So let's just say I have a lot of love for this particular deck. Although in my build, I did not play regular Tornadus. It was only Tornadus EX, because my theory, which I like to think I proved right, was I just want to KO stuff like Shaman, and Blow Through with plus power did that quite nicely. I don't need regular Tornadus, and Tornadus EX just needs a double colorless, and every time I played the mirror match, I would just run through their little Pokemon using Blow Through and then win the game. So yeah, I think it worked out quite nicely. I mean, in the last chance qualifying, Worlds as a whole, I kind of crashed and burned, but that's not the point. I got into Worlds, that's what's important. Now, Mewtwo Eels was another good version of Mewtwo. Kevin Nance, according to the lovely folks over at PTCG Archive, great website for looking up deck lists, got second place at US Nationals. Obviously, you would play Zekrom here. Some decks did play Zekrom EX, some didn't. And this was another one we would need another EX that came around in Dark Explorers. Dark Explorers got us really good EXs. But Raikou EX was able to hit the bench for 100 damage, so that was a card we would need, but Mewtwo Eels was another big version of this deck. Also, Mewtwo Terrakion. A Mewtwo Terrakion, right, was extremely simple. You had Mewtwo that was a good counter for Mewtwo, you had Terrakion that was a good counter for Darkrai, and that was basically the entire deck. The entire theory of the deck was, and it's hard to explain if you weren't playing back then, but the vast majority of the metagame was Mewtwo and Darkrai. Like, at Worlds 2012, 7 of the top 8 decks were either Mewtwo and Darkrai decks or Darkrai decks. It was kind of ridiculous. So the theory here was very simple. Let's just play the best counter to each of those 2 Pokemon, and we'll be fine. And the last deck I need to talk about here was my very own creation, one of my favourite decks I've ever made. It was Reggie Giga Cx with Mewtwo and Jirachi. But it actually functioned very similarly to CMT. The theory was very simple. Jirachi had the Poké Power Stardust song, play it to your bench, flip 3 coins, for each head attach a Psychic Energy from your discard pile to Jirachi. You would then use Shaman to move the energy where it needed to go, and both Regigigas and Mewtwo use double colourless energy. So you'd use double colourless and Jirachi and Shaman to get all the energy on, and then you would have Regigigas that could run through littler Pokemon, and Mewtwo doing Mewtwo things. As I said, I managed 33rd place at the ECC. I wrote a full report about the ECC. I didn't put a deck list in for some reason, so cheers for that, Wassy from 9 years ago, you moron. So apparently I didn't share a deck list. I suppose I thought I was being clever and secretive, but it's 9 years later and I really want to see my deck list. And I can't because I didn't put it in the article because I'm an idiot. Cheers past Wassy, you stupid idiot. So, yeah, I've done an article all about that on 6 Prizes. I'll link it in the description where I talk about the Mewtwo and all of that. I show you my games. I talk through them. I did go 6-2 and it wasn't enough. But I did win a city championships with the deck. But it was actually the second city championships that the shop had run, which meant I didn't get a trophy. So, I don't know. It didn't work out as well as it might. It was still one of my favourite decks ever. I had to mention it here. In reality, it's probably just a bad version of CMT with Jirachi instead of Celebi and Regigigas instead of Tornadus. But I loved it, and it done me good. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Next Destinies, a phenomenal set that brought in Mewtwo and changed the game because Mewtwo was a bit ridiculous. And next week we're talking Dark Explorers, and I know we've just seen 2 phenomenal sets in a row, but make no mistake about it, Dark Explorers is in no way, shape or form lessening the awesomeness, shall we say. But now it's over to you guys. If you were playing at the time, I want to hear your memories. If you weren't playing at the time, I want to hear your thoughts now you've seen the cards. And if you were playing at the time, back me up on how ridiculous Mewtwo was. That would be lovely. Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.